sponsored by Rabbi Michael and Jerry Laxmeter for their foolish flame of their granddaughter, Avigail Sarah Batshena Arona. It's also sponsored by Daniela Smith, who she actually came a couple of weeks ago. She was here, but she's online most weeks and in the evening, in memory of her grandmother, Rachel Gooder, Zlata Rachel Bat Avraham Yaakov. Also, one of the fellows who's almost always on the shir in the evening. He lost his mother this week. That's Joshua Menaster, and his mother's name was Yehudis Bat Baruch. She was an elderly woman who had a long life, but as I spoke to him last night, it's still losing a mother is losing a mother, and the shir should be for the refuah shlema, for those who need a refuah shlema, and le'iloi nishmas, those, I'm not going to say who need an Eloi, but we do what we can. So just to make a slight segue from there, so really, in a certain sense, we're dealing with generational responsibilities and feeling, in terms of grandparents concerned about a granddaughter concerned about grandparents, son, mother, and so on. So as a whole, what we're going to deal today is going to be certain generational, both trauma and whatever the flip side of trauma is. You can tell me it's healing, or you'll give me a word, and whatever word you come up with, I guess that'll be our title for today. Unless you don't come up with a word, then that will be traumatic, and then we'll stay with generational trauma. So let's begin. And along the way, we're going to notice something which Chazal noticed and what Chazal stressed, and they thought that that's what's going on. And some of it is not necessarily going to be obvious until you see it, and then you say, oh yeah, that was pretty obvious. B'chodesh HaShlishi, so starting from the beginning, having our preparation for Matan Torah. B'chodesh HaShlishi, L'tzeit B'nei Yisrael Me'eretz Mitzrayim B'yom Hazeh Bo Midbar Sinai. So first we have movement which is taking place, which is going geographically from one place to the other. V'yasumu refidim, v'yavo Midbar Sinai, v'yechanu b'midbar, v'yechan Shem Yisrael neged Ahar. And again, all of this is moving. The only slight thing that we notice in terms of perhaps an ascension is that they've come near a mountain. So there is this idea of somewhat of climbing. That slight indication is going to become much stronger in the next pasuk. Moshe Allah ela Elokim. And then Moshe ascends, Moshe goes up. Now, one of the things that I want you to notice is as we continue is going to be the amount of movement, especially the vertical movement. Moshe Allah Elokim, v'yikra elav Hashem min ahar leimar kol tamar levet Yaakov v'tagid levet Yisrael. Atem ra'item et asher asiti leMitzrayim v'sa etchem al kanfei nesharim. Again, I carried you. That goes up. I carried you. Just the image. I carried you up in the clouds. V'vietchem elai v'ata im shemo tishmu b'koli. So again, the main issue over here would clearly be you've seen Atem ra'item. The next pasuk, Im shemo tishma'u b'koli. So, and that's the thing that we would generally pay much more attention to than, again, this idea of the vertical movement. It's actually that we're about to witness, right, to see, experience a revelation. And we're going to also, there's going to be speaking which is taking place, and this overload between speaking and hearing. There's this great word that I only get to use once a year, and that is theophany, which is what takes place over here. He's going to say, I made it up again, but I didn't. And then you can use it if you need to. There is this theophany, and it's kind of like a combination between symphony and theology, so it's like this, he's looking it up. Okay. Theophany.
Visible manifestation to humankind of God.
Isn't that great? So now you just have to figure out how you're going to use it next week. But they're okay. Okay. So just don't try to do it in rhyme, okay? But it's easy to throw it into a sentence and then to sound extremely intelligent. You too could become a pseudo-intellectual. That's essentially our our goal. So, but again, Atem Re'item and Shema V'Koli, this is all going to be a part of that theophany, which takes place, this, incredible sound and light show with all kinds of theological pyrotechnics. Okay, we'll call it that. If unfortunately the only thing you can muster is the 4th of July, so what can I say? Then you're kind of missing what's taking place over here. ושמרתם את פריתי והייתם לסגולה מכל עמים כי לי כל הארץ ואתם תהיו לי ממלכת כהנים וגוי קדוש אלה דברים אשר תדבר על בני ישראל. So again, there is communication, talking about singing. Vayavo Moshe, now Moshe comes. Now, again, if Moshe went up, so then Vayavo Moshe really kind of should be that he comes down. That's I'm just saying this is what's suggested. And it's interesting, it's not to all the people. He reaches out to the elders, to the wise, to the leaders. Also keep in mind that this is right after we were told about the arrival of Yitro and appointing all kinds of people. Now, what really is the proper sequence of events, I don't have a clue, but especially in Muktam and Muchar, which is really suggested by Rashi already at this point, but at least in our Chumash, we just now had elders introduced, and the elders were there throughout the Egyptian discussions as well from the very beginning when Moshe arrives. Vayasem lifneim et kol hadvrim ha'ela asher tzivao Hashem. So the thing about Moshe is that Moshe is kind of in between. There's this wonderful question that the Gemara entertains, and that is that a Kohen is an emissary. The question is, who is he an emissary of? Is he a shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Am Yisrael? I know you were not going to say that. Or is he a shliach of Am Yisrael to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Or maybe even to a certain extent both. And you can say the same question by Moshe. Is Moshe a shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or is he a shliach of Am Yisrael? If you don't know this, one of the topics that Rav Soloveitchik actually liked, especially in terms of Moshe, especially in terms of this kind of topic, is the role of shlichut generally and the role of shlichut of Moshe. And there is a source in the very beginning of Avot Rabbi Natan, which says that Moshe becomes a shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is very difficult to understand, because generally you say shliach Adam Kimoto. You say that you need to be on the same stature to be a shliach. So how can anybody be on the same stature? And there is this really interesting then turn of, again, just open up the first couple paragraphs of Avot Rabbi Natan. It is kind of like a bright on Pirkei Avot. If you have a Gemara, then you'll look. It depends which edition it is, but wherever you'll find Pirkei Avot, after Sanhedrin, after Makot, Avot Zarah, right there you'll find the Gemara. You'll also find the Avot Rabbi Natan, was also published separately. Or you can find it online also. And again, first couple of paragraphs, it says that Moshe, during the days preparing himself to go up to Har Sinai, and then going up to Har Sinai, he doesn't eat and doesn't drink. But it says during the 6 days till he doesn't eat and doesn't drink, and it says, and he becomes like one of the Malchei HaSharet, and that seems to be the way that he can then become, what's a Malach? A Malach is a Shliach for Kadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, Moshe becomes, again, in what sense is he a Shliach? You can ask the same question. Is Moshe a Shliach to bring the ring down from the Chassan to the Kala? Or is Moshe a Shliach of the Kala to receive the Shliach, to receive the ring from the Chassan? Of course, I changed the Aseret HaDibrot and the Luchot to the ring. I'm just asking, who is he a shliach of? Or is he a shliach for both? So I'm just saying is that, especially when you think about Matan Torah in terms of some kind of a divine wedding, right? You're going to be, again, just read the words over here. We've done this before, but you can, again, you're going to become Melechet Goyim v'Goy Kadosh, Skula Mikol Amim. I mean, that sounds like a pickup line to me, right? What, you never thought of it in those terms? You're extremely special to me. I treasure you. 1 second. These are not the words that one is supposed to say? I mean, what do I know from pickup lines? Okay, again, if anybody's learning from me now, it's profoundly said. But yeah, there is some incredible romance underneath everything else which is taking place, which again then causes us to question, so what exactly is the role of Moshe? Right? We're good? Again, all of these are the words that you would say when you want to get married, except nothing. Except. except you may not be there yet. Okay, again, he comes, and as I said, he had gone up, and now he comes to them. And now Moshe is going to, you notice, he's going back and forth, and okay, God said that, right, again, the chassan said this, and the kala said okay, and goes back and says, and right, and he's going and he's running back and forth between the two of them. Okay, I'm going to come down from the cloud, right? Notice the cloud and come down. And then they're going to see that I'm talking to you, so therefore you're going to get your credibility. And therefore you're going to see, again, this very much suggests they're going to see that you are my shliach. They're going to see that you are my emissary. Vayiged Moshe Divrei Am El Hashem, and then Moshe goes back and tells what the people had said. See, now you just note this Moshe running back and forth. Yom Moshe Lech El Am V'Kidashtem Hayom Machar. Again, you have this kedusha. Go and get ready. You're going to go to the mikveh. By the way, literally, you're going to go to the mikveh right now. V'Kibsusim Lotam, and you're going to go and you're going to launder and put on the nice clothing and so on, which is also issues of Tuma and so on. Hashem. Again, we have our verticality now taking place, that then God is going to descend on the third day. So again, I'm going to just talk about this Moshe running back and forth and get ready and prepare. Be careful, they can't come up. So again, there's just really, it's the verticality which is interesting, clearly as a subtext, because there's so much else which is taking place. I'm just noting that it keeps happening. And then Kolonogeya Bahar Yumat, but you have to be careful. Certain things you can't do, you can't touch, Loti Gabo, and so on and so forth, danger. And then Vayered Moshe Minahar Am, and then we have now Moshe coming down. So I don't know about Moshe going up and Moshe coming down and everything in the middle.
Just what's the significance of the third day?
What is the significance of the third day? Yeah.
Other times.
Yeah, so if you want all the other days worked in, you have one simple thing to do, which is not simple. And that is look at every Rashi in Perek Yud Tet, and then, that's not enough, then look at every Rashi in the first 11 verses or so of Perek Kaf Daled. And then he will tell you on every day what took place, and part of the challenge is why is this divided into two different chapters, but then you'll start reading Kaf Daled and then superimpose it on Yutet, and then you'll realize where each of the days are accounted for. And now you realize this is only half of the narrative, there's another half of the narrative which is in next week's Parsha. So how can we make things more complicated? There you go. That's my job.
It doesn't say anywhere what day.
No, we had the first day. We have the first, right. But as I said, if you go back, you go forward. No, don't. So again, and now Moshe comes down. So this is our theophany taking place over here. Here you have all the sounds, and you have the thunders and the lightning and the sound of the shofar, and the people's response to all this is they are quite afraid. Okay? V'yotzei Moshe el Am. So again, now it's going out. We go up and down. V'yotzei Moshe el Am lekrat ha'elokim. V'yikir et ha'am lekrat ha'elokim. Sorry. Min ha'machaneh v'yityatzvu b'tachti rahar. And they become solidified, v'yityatzvu b'tachti rahar, on the bottom of the mountain. V'har Sinai yashan, and it's full of smoke. Kulo mipnei asher yarad alav Hashem ba'esh, where God has descended. Again, we have all of this movement taking place. Vayal shano, and the smoke goes up, it comes down, it goes up. Right? Vayal shano ke'eshan hakivshan, it's like the smoke of a furnace. V'yichrad kol hahar ma'od. And if the people were frightened before, and now the mountain gets frightened. But you call a shofar holech v'chazek ma'od, and the sound of the shofar gets stronger. Moshe yidaber v'lokim enenu b'kol. Moshe speaks and God responds without more sounds. We don't know about content at all right now. Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Now again, we have this movement taking place. El Rosh Hahar v'yikra Hashem l'Moshe et El Rosh Hahar Vayal Moshe, and now Moshe goes up. So again, I'm just trying to stress the verticality and all of the movements which are over here taking place. And I'll say it again, if I would have asked you beforehand, so what's going on here? I think you would have focused more on content, preparation, sound of God, lightning, maybe some of the shofar, but it's all of this movement. Again, you see it here, and I just want to stress, this is that Chazal sees it, and that's really, it's more interesting. Vayomer Shel Moshe, Raid Ha'am, right? Raid ha'ed ba'am, pin Yisrael Hashem l'rot v'nafal min rav. Again, there is this warning about them going down. V'gam hakun min Hashem l'Hashem yitchatshu, pin yifrotz mehem Hashem. V'yom Moshe Hashem lo yuchal la'am la'alot al Har Sinai. They can't come up. So again, I'm not getting into all the details, but you realize this is far more complicated than we thought. Especially, what is this whole conversation taking place? But I'm much more interested in just it's the choreograph. It's the divine choreography, which much more interests me much more about what's taking place over here, right? It's the movements. I don't understand all them, right? I don't know if any of you ever watched dance. I certainly didn't, but I understand there must be some movements. I once went to the ballet. I once went to an opera, but I was forced by the KGB. This is not even an exaggeration. We were stopped for questioning. I'm just trying to think. In Odessa, we had just we lost the trail of the KGB and spoke to some refusnik, and then they brought us in for questioning, and they said we're not acting like tourists. So we thought they were going to kick us out. So how do tourists act? Well, they go to cultural events. What cultural events? They go, for example, there is the opera, and I said we don't have tickets. They handed us tickets and said, now you should have to behave like tourists. So again, we didn't kick us out, but it wasn't very good. But going back to that, it was La Traviata in Russian, yes, in Russian. So the dance movements, I don't know the meaning of all of the movements, but I do know that there's some kind of, there's a choreographer. And that's important, right? There is a divine choreographer, and that is God, and there's lots of movement over here which is taking place, and we're not following every move, and that's for sure, but we're standing on the outside or watching, saying, wow, look at all this. Again, it's part of our theophany, but look at that. It's not only is there a revelation taking place, it's set to dance, it's set to movement. There is this really interesting movement which is taking place over here. Are we good?
Radiologically, is a divine choreography.
Clearly, and that's a sentence you would not have said a half an hour ago. Right? I just hope somebody who's interested in modern dance does not listen to this shir and then create some dance based upon all of this, because that would never work. And then Pasuk Kafei, finally, Vayered Moshe la'am vayomar aleihim. And by the way, what's the next pasuk? Moshe comes down, and what does he say to them? Right, it just ends. That's the end of Perek Yutet. So I really could have connected source 2. Vayered Moshe la'am vayomar aleihim vaydeber Elokim et kol dmei lemar. So who's speaking? I'm not resolving this question right now. But who is speaking the Ten Commandments? Is it Vayered Moshe la'am vayomar aleihim vaydeber Elokim et kol dmei lemar? Because later on, there's just contradictory information about all of this, but I don't want you to do what we always do, and what is that? We read Perek Yutet, and then we finish, and then we take a break and have a cup of coffee and take a week off, and then we come back and we read Perek Kaf, not realizing that we ended Perek Yutet in a really interesting place, and everything in Yutet was the preparation, and then and so on. How much further should we go over here and be reading all of this? When you get to Pasuk Tet Vav, which is right afterwards, ro'im et hakolot ve'et halapidim ve'et kol hashofar ve'et ha'arashen ve'yaram ve'yanu ve'imdu merachok. And they shake. I saw one book of customs say, what is the source that Jews shuckle when they daven? It's from here. Ve'yanu merachok. They were all shuckling. Right? This is not pshat. I hope no one thinks that it's pshat. It sounds more like they're shaking at a fear. Vayamdu merachok, and kind of recoiling. Vayomru el Moshe daber atay imanu v'nishma'a. Now, if Moshe was speaking, then why would they tell Moshe to speak? Apparently God is speaking, and now we know that we're completely confused. Va'ayu daber imanu l'kim pen namut. What else we have? Vayamoda amirachok. Anything else? Yeah. Pasuk Yutet. V'yomer Hashem Moshe kol tomaru b'nei Yisrael atem reitem ki min hashamayim dibarti imachem. You saw that I spoke to you, so now you realize. Again, Moshe's going up and Moshe's coming down. The sound of God's voice is coming down, apparently. Who is he speaking to? It sounds like he's speaking to Moshe, but he's speaking to the people, but the people see him speaking to Moshe. And I'm just going to say this again, that there's some real interesting things taking place, which if my job was to make things understandable, then I've completely failed. If my job is to show that things were not as simple as we perhaps thought they were, then I've done a very good job. And as this finishes up, ki min hashamayim dibarti alechem. Again, I spoke from above, from high above, and then it continues. Lo tasuni ti elokei kesef. Sorry, I misread that. That was terrible. What I just now did. I make fun of rabbis when they do that. It's even worse than when they do it in print. You saw what I did, right? Lo tasun iti Elohei kesef elezav. Right. When people write not to serve, Elokim acherim, that's not good because it's giving, no, it's not Elokim acherim, it's Elohei kesef Elohei zav lo tasa lachem. So that's just an interesting thing. This is after the Ten Commandments. And it's telling us not to make any false gods, to make images. Mizbach adama ta'aseli, but you should make an altar, and so on, which is a real interesting pasuk, which we're not going to engage. But if you're going to make an altar out of stones, it says not what not to do, not to use the sword, and so on. You got the cherev, charbacha, chorev, lots to think about. Lo taleh b'malot al mizbechi asher tekaleh ervatcha alav, and not to climb up in a certain way. And here we're telling the Kohanim they need to be mindful of tzniut, because sometimes when you wear a skirt, it's not the easiest thing to climb up a mizbeach. By the way, notice going up and going down again in terms of climbing up the ramp. So we now have completed in a completely inadequate way the first two chapters, or two of the chapters of this parsha, second two chapters, and it is now that we can move over and see this really interesting move that Chazal made. Now, I really hope that this doesn't come as a surprise to any of you, for the simple reason that I mentioned it around a month ago. So if it's a complete surprise, then I will now know I can give the same shiur every couple of weeks, and it will make my life easier. In source number 4, we have Yaakov's major dream. Avram has a major dream, vision, communication, and Yaakov has a major dream, epiphany, communication, vision. Yaakov's is source number 4, Vayachalom v'nei sulam mutzav arza v'rosho magia hashamayma v'nei malachei Elokim, this time, olim v'yordimbo. Right? Yaakov wakes up and he realizes Yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh v'nochi lo yadati v'yira v'yom amanda raha makom hazeh in zeki in beit Elokim v'zashar shamayim. This is the opening to heaven. He wakes up in the morning. V'yikach et ha'evin asher sam b'rishtav v'yasam oto matzeva v'yikrat shem makom hahu beit el v'ulam luz shem ha'ir l'rishona. And obviously I skipped all of the content of the divine message over here. Chazal, when they try to unpack Yaakov's vision, so there are all the famous ones, which I think are the interpretations which are at this point more intuitive. But the reason they're more intuitive is because we've been told, it's taught, which means you would not have thought this by yourself. For example, these are the 4 kingdoms. You never would have read the 4 kingdoms into this by yourself. There's nothing here about the 4 kingdoms other than you were told that there are the 4 kingdoms here. And there are various interpretations, which I'm going to say it again, we're taught, but just because we're taught them doesn't mean that there's anything about the text which suggests them. What happens in source number 5 are multiple moves by Chazal, all of them leading in the same direction to the same place for various reasons. V'nei sulam ze hakevesh, mutzav arza ze mizbeach, mizbach adama taseli. Just notice something. This is in Bereshit Rabbah. This is in Parshat Vayetze. This The topic over here is the sulam. And it just now gave me a couple of different references which all relate to Matan Torah. V'rosho megia shamayma, elo korbanot shirachan olel shamayim, v'nei malachei elokim, elo hakohanim agdolim, olim v'yordimbo, she'ein olim v'yordim bakevesh. And bringing this into a Beit HaMikdash kind of thing, but it's interesting, the pasuk it brought was from Shemot Kaf, that pasuk about a mizbeach, that we don't know what it was doing there at the end. V'nei Hashem natziv alav, v'ite et Hashem nitzav mizbeach, rabbanim patrim lebi Sinai. And the rabbi said, no, this is talking about Sinai. You just realize the previous one was not all that far from Sinai, because the verses that was using from Sinai. And over here it says, they said it's Sinai, vechalom v'nei sulam, ze Sinai. This is Sinai. Now, the only thing that would have stopped us from entertaining this possibility would have been, first of all, a learned response. And what is that? We're told that this is Yerushalayim, which is really quite difficult that it's Yerushalayim. Forget about where it is for a moment. It's really difficult to say it's Yerushalayim because it doesn't seem to be Yerushalayim. It seems to be some other place. What was the place? It's Beit El, or either Beit El or originally Luz. So then you have that really great Rashi that there's an angle, right, but it's not direct, right, and the trajectory of this ladder, somehow the middle of it is over Yerushalayim. You remember that? But you realize that that is an explanation, trying to explain something. But of course, then thematically, Yerushalayim is this place that things go up and things go down. The word of God comes down, right? On the other hand, the offerings, the prayers go up. Mutzav arza vayityatzvu b'tachtit ahar. So now you realize that it's doing something over here. But first, what is it doing? There's something which is primary. The primary issue is what I spent all the time trying to get you to understand, and that is all of the references of the going up and the going down and the going up and the going down. That's what Chazal see over here. And then it notices another linguistic hook. And what is that? That the ladder, if that's the right translation, the sulam, is described as mutzav arza, and look at the same words, vayityatzvu b'tachtit ahar. So it's saying, oh, there is this thematic connection. Rosho magia shamayma, v'ahar ba'or ba'esh ad leva shamayim. So again, it's pushing it forward, and what it's saying is that in the rabbinic, at least, could be stronger than imagination. In the rabbinic imagination, what Yaakov is saying, so now we have to pause a second. So if Yaakov goes to his religious guide and he says, this is the vision that I saw, an informed religious guide who has timeless understanding will say, oh, what you saw most closely aligns with something which will take place starting in chapter 19 of the book of Shemot, and that is Matan Torah. That's what you saw. And that is this incredible vision that you saw taking place. And by the way, we'll continue, because again, there'll be some, it's not finished. And it says, Davar Acher, that's Dalet Aleph, Vinei Sulam Ze Sinai, Otiyot Didin, or it should be Didan, I think, Hu Otiyot Didan. It's that numerically, the words Sulam and Sinai have the same gematria. Now, by the way, it's not all that often that Midrashim offer up gematriot. It's saying, of course, and just to remind us, Sulam is never used in any other verse in Tanakh. This is the only time that it's used. And it's saying, oh, what is the Sulam? There's actually a code of this. This is Sinai. And I'm going to say it again. If Yaakov's guide can tell him to understand what's taking place, again, his dream interpreter, if you will, but one who knows about this later scene. It says, V'nei malachei Elokim al shem rechav l'kim rabbasav alafei shenan v'lamadnu l'neviim shenakum malachim. We have times that prophets are called angels, because what is a prophet? He is somebody who is an emissary of God, bringing the divine word down. Tichtiv, and it brings a pasuk for this, and it says, V'nei malchei Elokim ze Moshe v'Aaron, olim u'Moshe ala Elokim v'yordim ze Moshe v'yarad Moshe v'nei Hashem nitzav alav v'yed Hashem ar Sinai El Rosh Hahar. So now you realize that all of that I was trying to point out, again, for me, that was the starting point. It was the vertical movement taking place. But now when you read a verse saying, Hinei malchei Elokim olim v'yordimbo, and again, always the question is, why is it olim first and yordim? Because it's Moshe going up. It's Moshe going up during this, and by the way, it's during the preparation for Matan Torah, Moshe going up and Moshe coming down. And there's one more comment at the end, which we're not going to get into that much. It talks about the Gimel Regalim he saw, and then Regel Shlishi, and then at the very end it talks about the three Avot, Kach Avot, in Pachot Mishlosha. So here's what we're going to do. We've already noticed something, and that is that without working hard, really, without working hard, reading Perek Yutet and Perek Kaf, again, in the rabbinic imagination, it kind of sent us back to Yaakov, but that last line over here, noting that there's actually three avot, so now you know what I want to do. A couple more things to do, but one of them is I just want to think about, are the other two avot here? And they are so much here that the only thing is that we're surprised that I have to even make believe I'm working in order to point this out. The first and the easy one is Rashi in source 6, which is Perek Yud Pasuk Yud Gimel. What did that Pasuk actually say? It was talking about when you could or when you couldn't go up to the mountain, and the verse, it says Lo Tigabo, and so on, right? Bimshoch hayovel hemayalu bahar. The whole time of the blast of the horn, you cannot go up to the mountains. So here it's described as a yovel, and Rashi writes, "Whose shofar shall ayil?" What horn are we talking about? We're talking about the ram's horn. Now the ram's horn, when I say ram's horn, you go jumping straight off to Rosh Hashanah, but you know that there is an original ram's horn, because there was an original ram. Shekain ba'aravia korin l'dichra yuvla. It says that the yovel is called a ram. V'shofar shel elo shel Yitzchak haya. That this is the shofar of Yitzchak. So it's saying is that the background music, if you get the credits at the end of the movie, background music is going to say shofar provided by Yitzchak's ram. That's where this sound is coming from. So therefore now you realize something which is interesting, and that is that Yitzchak is here, but it's not just here. Yitzchak is in another place in this whole scene as well. In source number 7, and for the moment we are only going to look at on page 3 in Pasuk Tedvav, v'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot, איך היו מטפחים בשמיעתם באוזניהם שכל אחד ואחד, ואיך יוצאים מתוך הבעירה אש, ואת כל השופר, איך היה מחיי מתים. That's really interesting. Now, we know, or if we don't know, we're about to be reminded that there is this theme that, again, Chazal see that during Matan Torah, people expire, people die, and people come back to life. And then you just have to ask yourself another question. So where do we actually see that first about, again, thematically, somebody who is perhaps on the cusp of dying, or according to some midrashic understandings, does die, and then returns, and that is clearly Yitzchak by the Akedah, but this went one step further. And again, if you want, I'll read this into the Akedah. If you want, I can give a drasha now for Rosh Hashanah based on this. Is that the shofar of Rosh Hashanah has the ability to bring people back from the dead. That's just an unbelievable statement. And again, I can say this in a less literal sense. I can say somebody designated for death, somebody who's already been found guilty, somebody who has not repented until that moment. And what moment is that? It's the moment that they hear the call of the shofar. And what does the call of shofar do at Matan Torah? It invigorates people, and it brings people back to life. I'm saying that is such an interesting comment, but now I just connected to the other comment, and what's that? Where is this shofar from? Okay, so go back to the scene of Akedat Yitzchak. Yitzchak is on the altar. By the way, we just now got to another altar. That should be interesting as well. But this altar, of course, is on Har Sinai, that one is on Har Sinai, which what we just now kind of did is started to think about Yaakov's vision versus Yitzchak's experience. And here the knife is coming down, and at that point we have a malach, Hashem, coming into it. We're back, right, coming down. We have our malach, right, the voice coming down, and the malach says, stop, right? So it stops. And then Avram looks up and he sees this ram, and the ram's horn is entangled in the brush. And Chazal beautifully say that whenever we get entangled in sin, we'll also be able to use the ram's horn in order to somehow, now just one step further, not just to bring about spiritual rehabilitation, but much, much stronger than that, in order to bring us back from the dead. Which means, perhaps you want to say all this metaphorically. I'm fine, I like metaphors, and say they're almost dead, they were thinking about being dead, they kind of felt like they were dead spiritually. But this is such an interesting comment. It's saying is that the kol shofar chaya mechayei metim. And it's interesting because the very next pasuk they say to Moshe, you better speak to us or we're going to die. And maybe the informed statements of somebody who just now died and came back to life is saying, I can't, my heart can't handle this. I can't keep on doing this. And if you look at the Gemara in source number 8, of course, commenting on V'tatzvu b'tachti tahar, right? That's what we just now had seen, taking us back to the ladder, or the sulam. Amar Avdimi barchama barchasa, melamit shakafa HaKadosh Baruch Hu leim et har kagigit. And you all know this, I think. By the way, Jasper says a gigit is a beer barrel. So you see we're getting ready for Purim now. So it says that he held, and there is a statement about Purim right after this. V'amar lahem im atem mekablim Torah mutav. If you accept the Torah, great. V'im lav sham tiyeh kvuratchem. That means accepting the Torah or death. That's what it is. There's not a great deal of a choice over here. Continuing on the next page, source number 9, next page in the Gemara, Pechet Omid Aleph, Omer B'Shu ben Levi, who, by the way, this is interesting because he also had near-death or death experiences. He is one who gets to see where he is in the world to come and comes back. That's Rabbi Shua ben Levi, which makes all of this far more interesting. Obviously, I'm not talking about that now because we would never get out of that. And each and every one of the dibrot, they perished. And then so it says God sprinkled them with tal. So here the Gemara says it's tal, but you realize that the Targum Yonatan said it was the shofar. That the shofar is what brings them back to life. Are we good? I think that we are good. I'm just trying to decide which way we pivot right now. When we get into the Ten Commandments, it's going to, by the way, seem right now that I'm making a little bit of a detour. It's only a little bit of a detour. Because I have to get to a particular point. It mentioned the first 2 dibrot in terms of dying. It didn't mention the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th, but you could easily say ... Now all of you know something, and what do you know? That God only said the first 2 dibrot. Now, why do you think that? You don't have to answer me. Which means you know that. But why do you think that? Which means where does that come from? So the simple answer, this is more of a formal answer, is in source number 10. By the way, the answer is so good, you don't realize yet. The answer is so good that you're going to say, of course that's the case. But if you didn't see it yet, then you have to see it. Once you see it, then again, it's one of these many things you can't unsee. We're going to have a couple of those still today. No promises. B'li neder. In source number 10, Dorish Rav Simlai, 613 mitzvot nimelo leMoshe, 365 shlavim kiminyan yemot hachama, u248 asay keneged ever Rav shel Adam. Ever wondered where it talks about the numbers? Here it is, the end of the Gemara Makot. Amar Rav Himnuna, Mikra. Where do you get this from? Torah, Tzibelenu Moshe Morasha. Torah, b'gematria. There you go. A second gematria today. Torah in gematria is 611. So we're missing 2. God gave Moshe 611. But the other 2 they heard directly from heaven. That takes 613. So the Gemara says it. The question is, where does it get it from? The answer is, if you look at the Ramban in source 11. If והנה לשון הכתוב הזה, את שם השם אלוקיך, כאילו משה ידבר, וכן בכל דיברות אחרי כן. ובשניים הפסוקים הראשונים, השם ידבר, אנוכי אשר הציתיך, על פניי, כי אנוכי, לאוהבי ולשומרי מצוותיי. ומפני זה אמרו רבותינו, אנוכי וליה לך מפי הגבורה שמענו, שהם עיקר הכל. So just stop a second, in case you didn't understand the Ramban. He's telling you to look at source number 2. What does God say? Anochi, who's speaking? God is speaking. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It's first person, the first one. Right? Don't have other gods. Lo Elohim acherim al panai. Who's speaking? God is speaking. Lo taseh lechapes v'chnuma v'asher mitachad. Right? Lo tevehim ki anochi Hashem Elokecha el kana. Hoked avon avot al banim al shleishim ve'al rubim l'sonai. So God is here gets another generational point that those who rebel, sin, display hatred towards God, God is going to hold it generationally. But those who have a healthy relationship, God says the reward is also generational and that much longer. Now notice what happens in the very next Dibra. Pasuk Zayin, Lo tisa et shem Hashem Elokecha l'shav. What should have it said if it was continuing? Lo tisa et shmi. The rest of the commandments, Ki sheshet mimasa Hashem et hashmayim v'etaretz, al kein berach et Hashem. Where did Chazal get this from? That God said the first 2 Dibrot and the others were said by Moshe? Because the first 2 are first person and the rest of them are not. Okay, are not.
That's so much better than Gematria, Rabbi.
I'm saying it's there. I'm saying it's there. It's just staring at you. And I'm going to say it again. Should I say this again? Once you see that, you can't unsee it, and you say, of course, God is speaking the first 2 because look at the content. Look at what God is saying. Yes? It was worth coming just for that today? Okay. And Chazal know that this is the case, and they say, oh, look at, again, the Gematria, if you want to say Qud, if you want to say any other word you want, it's fine with me. But the Ramban is saying that's the motivation of Chazal. And what's really the Ramban's great comment over here? Read the words, right? Read the words. So that's what's so interesting is that we've gone through, I'm not going to say how old all of us are, certainly not collectively, right? I think like 1,000 years old, all of us together, that maybe that we never noticed that. That's really interesting, and kind of like, yeah, like, okay, I'm sure a lot of people couldn't even name all 10 commandments without noticing who's speaking in them. So that is really interesting, but it's also the content in this point where God speaks about this generational relationship, and that is, again, God is speaking. So I really hope that struck you as something which is interesting, and I think we succeeded on that point.
Sure.
Yes.
People really want Gematria to work out. Like, people love Gematria, and they'll go above leaps and bounds to make Gematria work. Just for an example, the last week, how many bodies did they look at?
Yeah, I saw.
They were more than 250. They were more than 250, but they said 250 because they so wanted the Gematria of round.
Okay. One second. Should I check out if what you're saying is correct?
Check. Feel free to check.
I had a meeting. You know, I'm one of the rabbis of Zaka, and I had a meeting with the other rabbis, and I didn't ask. I could have asked.
Feel free to check.
Journalists.
Rabbi, can I have a question?
If you
1,000, it's just because you're talking the last couple of weeks, so much about Abraham, it's go to our forefathers.
let me get to Avram. Correct. We're going to.
That's the thousands.
We're going. Yes. Okay. Let's just decide. So again, the Ramban in 11 is the one who pointed out. The last line in 11 is, he actually gives a more interesting explanation here. He claims that the first 2 they heard directly, and they understood them from God, and the other 8, they heard it, but they need Moshe to explain it. Again, what the Rabban is trying to do is work out some of the complexity of the verses that I had noted along the way, and there was what sounded like contradiction, so he's saying, no, there's not a contradiction, it's what necessitated more information, and versus what they understood by themselves. There is perhaps... There's a couple of more issues that I want to circle back to. One is that we talked a little about death and coming back from death, and that was the shofar. If you go back to Yaakov, first of all, a reason to talk about Yaakov is Yaakov Avinu lo met. Right, Yaakov is the one who also seems to live, and what does it mean? Yaakov lo met, and Chazal deal with it, and the flip side, Yaakov Avinu lo met, and Am Yisrael chai, that absolutely go together. In the name of the place that this took place was Luz. That's where, again, we're going back to Yaakov's vision. And in source 12, there is a musing that the Gemara has about Luz, a place called Luz. Tanya, he Luz, shetzovim b'tchelet. Luz is the place that they would color the blue, the tchelet. He Luz, shabbat Sancherev v'lo bilbala. This is the place that Sancherev, when he mixed up the populations of all kinds of places, but he couldn't touch this place. Luz is invincible. Nebuchadnezzar v'lo chirva. Nebuchadnezzar got there, but he couldn't destroy it. V'af malach hamavet ein la reshut la avorba. And this is a place that the angel of death has no power over Luz. So I'm going to say Yaakov Avinu lo met. You have Luz as this place of immortality, but it says what would happen if somebody from Luz had to die? Elizakenim shabab izman. Shadatan katzaleim is that they feel, again, we can discuss this in terms of euthanasia, they feel they can't carry on anymore. Yotzim chutz l'choma v'hein meitim. If in order to die they had to leave Luz. If you're in Luz, you can. So there is this idea of this immortality connected. Okay. In source number 13 now, going back to what we just now read, again, I just hope that the sequence of all this made sense. I know that there was a slight hiccup in terms of, in your minds, of how all of this worked. But now go back to the content in terms of what God said, in terms of those 1,000 generations, right, which is what you wanted to get back to. The Ramban in source 13, which is actually a couple of lines before the other Ramban, the other one was Perikaf Pasuk Zayin, and now we're going back to Pasuk Hey and Vav. Poked avon avot al banim. So he writes that Amar Rav Avraham the Ben Ezra, Kitam Pkida, Kitam Zichira. Right? Poked means to remember. God remembered. Kimov Hashem Pakadet Sarah. By the way, that's great, because now we're not only got Avram there, now we got Sarah in there as well, right, as referenced in that Sarah Tadib wrote. He has a little bit of an argument with him, and he says, at the end of that paragraph, I've written about this in other places. You can look in Parak Lamed Chet, that's where we have Yehuda and his sons, and the Gilgal, and so on, and Yibum. Great. On Pasuk Vav, Lo Avai Lo Shemoi Mitzvotai, Neram Mashmud HaKatuv, Shazu Havtacha Binyan HaMitzvot Elu Asher Iskir, Yomar Kihu Oseh B'hem Chesed Lalafim Lav. There are certain things that God remembers, and He will remember that kindness for thousands of years, generations. Hema Mosrim Nafsham Alav. These are the people that were Mosrim Nefesh. Because somebody who notes and accepts and is willing to sacrifice their lives for belief in God, and he rejects all other gods, even at the pain of death, Yukru Ohavav, are called those that love me. Because again, the verse said, right, it continued, Ohavav, if you go look back at the pasuk, Kizui avash nitchayvu ba benafshotenu, because that is the kind of love of God that we are commanded. K'moshe amar v'ahavta Hashem l'kecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha. As we know from Rabbi Akiva, even to the point of Kiddush Hashem, shetimtzor nafshecha v'chicha ba'avato, that a person has to sometimes give up their life because of the love of God. Shelo tachlifenu be'el acher, never to exchange God for another God. But lo tishtevimo el nechar ulakach ne'emar ba'Avram zera Avraham ohavli. And that's why Avram is referred to as the one who loves me. So it says, again, I will repay 1,000, descendants of those who love me, So who is the one who loves me? It's Avraham. And what does love mean? It means somebody who's prepared for Kiddush Hashem. By the way, he's taking us so close to something which I think should be obvious. Shenatan nafsho shelo yavo avodah zara ba'ur kazdim. And there he said it. And Avraham, of course, was willing to be moser nefesh rather than serve a god or other gods, idolatry, back in Ur Kasdim. Ushar tzadikim yakush shamay mitzvotav. Avram is referred to as that one who loves. So therefore, what the Ramban just now did, in terms of the content of one of the Dibrot, he told us that this is talking about Avram, because Avram is the quintessential example of somebody who's moser nefesh. And he says, and I have another rabbinic source. Meaning, he's saying it's not just my sense of reading this verse, and it is his sense. The Ramban does that a lot. He tells us what his sense is, but he says, no, but there's a mechilta that says that as well. And then he says, and specifically, it's those who are in the land of Israel and sometimes have a very difficult time keeping things properly, but they are willing to sacrifice what they need to. And you can read the rest of this, but there's all coursing about Mesirat Nefesh. At the very end, he says, "Our parish Rabbi Natan ki ava mesirat nefesh ala mitzvah, aber yesh b'zeh sod amar she'avram asar nafsho ba'ava ki nishrav chesed lavram l'shar neviim b'gvura v'avenza." Okay, we're not going to get into the secrets of the Ramban, but what we will notice is at least the veneer of what he just now described and discussed, and that is that he sees Avraham here. Now, there was something else that a hint that I dropped along the way. I don't know if you noticed it. But first, let's go back with the Ramban. Source 14, we have that reference to Sarah, so I hope that you're happy to find Sarah here. Source 15 is the scriptural source, what the Midrash is built on. The Midrash tells us how Avraham's father, back in the day, found that Avram had broken all the idols, and then he takes him to Nimrod. And then he says, worship the fire, worship this, worship that. The question is, where's the fire? Right? The Midrash describes the fire, and then it gets thrown into a furnace, so I can continue my question and say, and where's the furnace? So if we use our favorite principle, which is the theory of conservation of furnaces and fire, there is a furnace which is found back in the towards the beginning of Bereshit, and the one behind it, you have to work a little harder, is Nimrod. Nimrod is the one who builds a city, and then everybody comes to that city, and then they build a tower, meaning this is Nimrod's handiwork. So if you look at the words in source 15, there's so much more than needs to be described. Vayamru ish areu havan nilbana levenim v'nisrofa l'srefa. They are building bricks. By the way, that itself should be completely fascinating, but hold on to that. They're building bricks. So there's a furnace there. What are they doing at the furnace? They're making bricks. Why do they need bricks? This is the description of building the tower. By the way, the tower is described in the exact same way as the ladder, just in case you need a little bit of closure. Just like we saw with the Sulam. So hopefully this became a little bit more interesting. Later on, when Avraham has his major vision and his major dream and his major epiphany, which is of course the Brit Bein Abtarim, where he's told that his children are going to go into exile, which by the way, notice Yaakov's dream is when he's going into exile. You're going to go into exile, but you're going to come back. Here, your children go into exile, but they're going to come back. And over here, it says, source 16, Vayomer Lavani Hashem, Asher Hotzoticha Me'or Kazdim L'Teit Lachet Eretz. Now, a lot of us read Or Kazdim as the name of the place, right? If you fill this out a little bit more in terms, you know what? First source 18. Or is fire. And therefore, there are those who imagine, and maybe it's pshat, that this verse says, I'm the one who saved you from the furnace. Which means, instead of this being rabbinic imagination, it's saying, no. We notice the furnace there. we hear God saying, I saved you from the furnace. And just for good measure, in source 17, which is just, I should have put those together, sorry, 16 and 17. Over here it continues, and it talks about the 400 years and be slaves, and then look at the vision that he sees. V'yeh shemesh b'aval talya, v'hinei tanur ashan v'lapid esh. Which means it's at this point that God is going to make this covenant with Abraham. But what are the visions that he's seeing? You have the fire, and you have the smoke. And what else do you have? And you have a furnace. So it's all that we did is that Avram has a vision. So what is the vision of? Which furnace is this? Is this the furnace he was saved from? And again, you want to tie things a little bit more. You know that I've said in the past that Yitzchak, goes from death to life when his father offers him, and Avram experiences the same thing. And therefore, by Matan Torah, which is going to link at this point, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Oh, just to note what we may have missed till now. We may have missed back on page 1, when we saw the description. Did you miss this? In Pasuk Yud Chet, V'har Sinai Ashan. By the way, doesn't this remind us of Avram's vision now? Kulom ibnei asher yarad alav Hashem ba'esh, vayal ashano ke'eshen hakivshan. The vision that they're all having is that they're seeing a kivshan. Wow. Can we try to put this together right now? We have the building of the tower. There's a kivshan there. They're building bricks. And these bricks are a rebellion. We have Avram being told that your descendants are going to be enslaved. By the way, what do they end up doing when they're enslaved? They end up building bricks. And we have Avram being thrown into this furnace, being saved from the furnace and going from life to death. And therefore we have this same theme that then Yitzchak goes through afterwards. And this is part of what Har Sinai is. Now, of course, you notice that there's really only one thing which is missing. So that's what we obviously have to still locate and find. I know when I say obviously, that may not be as obvious to you. So let's take a look and see what it is that was missing. When we continue in source 19, Vayal Moshe, we go back to our going up and going down again. This is Perek Kaf Daled, which I told you in the beginning is the continuation of the description of the preparations for Matan Torah. Vayal Moshe v'Aaron Deviu v'Shiv Mizrach Yisrael v'Yiru, and what do they see? They have a vision. Et Elokei Yisrael v'Tachal v'Lav K'Maseh Livnat HaSapir u'Ke'etzam HaShamayim L'Tohar. They see something. What do they see? Livnat Sapir Ke'etzam HaShamayim L'Tohar. We have there V'echzu et Elokim V'echlu V'yishtu, and what else? That's enough for now. Later on, Yecheskel in source 20, which the Ramban will be very sympathetic to. Umimal l'rakia sharasham kimara even sapir dmut kisei. By the way, this takes us back to Yaakov's vision, because when Yaakov's vision, what are we told that he sees at the top? He sees the kisei. He sees the kisei. All that I'm pointing out is that on at least a midrashic level, but with literary hooks all along the way, there is this incredibly interesting, I don't know what to say. It's woven together. There's something being woven together out of all of these images combined. If you look at the Targum Yonatan in source 21, he writes over here, and what do they see? Even sfirim maskir shiabud sheshibdu mitzrayim b'nei Yisrael betitu v'levanim. What do they see? They see the throne of God, but they see it's made out of the bricks that they were making in Egypt. So I just have to pause here for a second. What we have in the whole texture of Matan Torah is we have this Yaakov reference, the angels going up and going down, which is real interesting commentary on what's taking place here by Matan Torah. We have this Yitzchak reference, which includes two different elements. One was the shofar, and the other one was the coming back to life. We have the Avram reference, which is the tanur, which is staring at us, and the tanur just keeps showing up. The tanur was there as well, right, by Avraham's Brit Bein Abtarim, which is what leads us to this particular event. And our theory of conservation of our furnaces takes us back to when they're building the Levanim, which is then Avram's being thrown into. Now, when I go back to generational trauma, can you imagine a really interesting conversation taking place between Avraham and then the slaves? And they're saying, you don't know what it was like. And I just have to continue what took place over here. The rest of this Targum here describes how babies were thrown into the furnace in the making of the bricks, and it's just an absolutely horrific image. If you look at Rashi in source 22, Kamase levenata sapir, hiata lefanav b'shata shibud l'skor tzaratan sheYisrael. That vision reminded us of the time of the pain. Uke'etzam hashayim l'tohar misheneglu ha'or v'chedva lefanav. Then it somehow turns l'tohar lashon barur v'tzalul. This is actually it's a type of a response to why bad things happen to good people. There's this dual image which is taking place. They see this image of pain, but they also see this image of, it's not just redemption, it's more than that. It's understanding that there is a certain type of duality over here. And I'll say it again, it's just such an interesting comment. The Chizkuni is going to continue, and then source 25 of Chaim Paltiel, along the same lines, and tell us about the different sides of it. In source 24 again, it's the babies who were killed, and there's unfortunately a lot about that. So they're looking up and they're realizing that the throne of God is built by pain. The throne of God is built, if you want to use that Rambani for Kiddush Hashem, you now realize that they accepted God's decree just like Avram accepted God's decree, and somehow they left death to come out to life. What I'm trying to articulate is that Matan Torah becomes such an interesting experience. All that we ever focus on ourselves is we focus on, oh, God gave us Torah. It's like, oh, we have responsibility. And what I've been trying to focus on are the images of the visions about what is taking place over here and what is that they're seeing, and how Chazal see that what they're seeing, again, without getting to content yet, what they're seeing is something which links together Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, but it doesn't stop there, because it also links together their experiences. And then this realization that what they're experiencing is what Avram had experienced. And that becomes important, because if you ever needed this sense, are we deserving of standing by Har Sinai and receiving the Torah? And then we see that what Avram experienced is what we're experiencing, what Yitzchak experiences is what we experience at Har Sinai, and we're having this same, again, multi-generational, intergenerational experience over here. It just colors this whole thing a little bit more, and I just want to end up with one more comment about about all of this. If you look at Reb Chaim Paltiel, it tells us that the bricks had two sides to it. On one side was one color, the other side was the other color. And again, it goes back to this thing that we already understood from Rashi. That God looks at this and he remembers the servitude and the pain that they went through, which means God's throne is built by our suffering. It's an interesting point. And they see, and then it turns around and it becomes this other color. What color does it become? Continue a couple lines later. It says, it becomes like the tchelet. So let me just remind you one more thing. When it says they see etzem shemaim l'tohar, the Gemara tells us that when it comes to tzitzit, what are the color of the tchelet? It's blue. The blue is the color of the sea, and the sea is the color of the sky, and the sky is the color, actually goes all the way up to the kisei hakavod. So this whole linkage over here takes place with this color blue. Now there's going to be this whole discussion, Rabbeinu B'chai, especially towards the very end, Valdata Kabbalah Kamase Livnata Sapir Yodu Eitzel Chachmei Merkava Ki Kisei Kavod Miyusad Migimel Yisodot Eish V'Ruach Mayim Shein Atzalim Migimel Midot Chesed Din V'Rachamim. Again, the different colors reflect the different ways that God relates to us at different times. Ve'im Gimel Marot Lavan Odem Tchelet. Right, again, the sapir could be sapphire, right, which is one color. The tchelet is another color. V'tein alibcha ki yiskir levanat al mara haloven v'sapir al mara ha'adom ke'etzem shemaim al mara atchelet lekach targum onkelos, and so on. Atchelet dom liyam v'yam dom l'rkiya v'rkiya dom l'kisei hakavod. So just to, again, to finish this up, remember the Gemara I read a little while ago, what is Luz? Luz is the place, it says, that they made the tchelet, which means this ability, and what is the ladder? The ladder which connects us to heaven. So what is that connects us to heaven? It is the experiences that take place over here, some of them quite painful, become part of this kisei hakavod, and I'll say it again, there seems to be this fascinating attempt for Matan Torah, again, before one word of content, and there will be words of content, especially the first two Dibrot, where God speaks directly to us and talks about the intergenerational responsibility that He feels to take care of us because of things that are taking place in the past. And then we realize that the building blocks of Matan Torah were the experiences of Yaakov and his dreams and his visions, what he sees, were the experiences of Yitzchak and what he sees, were the experiences of Avraham. Especially with Avram, it gets interesting because it goes back to the furnace, and it goes back to making the bricks, and it goes back to him almost dying, but walking out of that. And then their experience of the loss that they had, the trauma that they had, and be able to then see that that built the Kisei HaKavod, which now turns from really a color of din, a color of red, a color of sapphire, and suddenly it turns around, and they see the brother, and they see the Tchelet. By the way, Tchelet is also the Tachlis. It's like the purpose, to have this understanding of what all of this was about, to realize that the suffering that one generation goes through somehow becomes the liberation that another generation goes through. Which means we also have lived in a generation where unfortunately there has been death and suffering and so on. And then to realize that somehow the red turns around to become something which is blue when you understand that God accepts these offerings and God accepts this kind of a gesture, and to realize that it all goes back to Avram Avinu in terms of what he himself had experienced. At that moment, how could they not feel connected to Avram? How could they not feel connected to Yitzchak? How could they not feel connected to Yaakov? And how could they not feel connected to Sarah, and so on? And how can they not feel that they have a place in heaven as well, that they have a place in terms of that Kisei HaKavod which is there, and they realize that the words that are about to come out, and the laws that they're about to receive, and the Torah which has become a part of them, they have a part of heaven as well, because they also had a ladder, and that ladder took them up to heaven, and look what they were able to build in heaven, and that is the Kisei HaKavod.